This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories. And welcome to a video I promised earlier in the week. This is probably coming out on Friday, since I just had a bunch of stuff coming out on Wednesday and Thursday. So I wanted to put this back. But with this, I will have spoilers for really the first 3 episodes. I might touch on the fourth one. So we'll just say, just to be safe, because I'm not sure what I'm talking about, there'll be spoilers up to episode 4 of Kenobi. So if you're not fully caught up on the show, please don't watch it. Well, watch this. You can watch the show. I worded that really poorly, but that's a funny thing to keep. So I'll keep it in. And yeah, looking at this, I'm going to talk about why Kenobi being broken makes sense here. Well, I think that Luke being broken in The Last Jedi does not make sense. I'll admit I am not really a fan of the sequels, and at least up to now, I have been really enjoying Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I know there's people who think differently. And I just want to say why I think that Obi-Wan being broken in this show makes sense. While I think that it didn't make as much sense for Luke to be broken in The Last Jedi. And the main thing is, I think the circumstances they are in are completely different. Taking a look at what led to Luke being broken was basically him doing something that I feel was really out of character. Many others do too, but with this, Luke tries to kill Ben Solo, and then his temple is burned down. And I mean, technically, if you go off the comics, it was like Palpatine or someone who struck the temple with lightning, and that's how it was destroyed, so Ben wasn't even responsible. But Luke just basically, lost a few students. And although that is bad, it was first off a decision that was seemingly out of nowhere and not really in character for Luke, since he believed in Vader, who did way worse things than Ben did at that point. And Ben literally just had bad thoughts in his head. And even if he did believe that Ben was responsible for this, it was still a really dumb decision for him to make. But also, it's definitely not as bad as the big mistake Obi-Wan made, which I'll be going into in a moment. But just looking at everything with Luke, it's also really odd because we've seen how he is so hopeful and wants to protect his friends and everything, and doesn't want to give up. And with that, I just think the reasoning they gave was not good enough to explain it. And the actions that he did before were feeling really out of character. But with Obi-Wan, I definitely could see how these things really have affected him. One last thing with Luke I was trying to mention is he was only on Ahch-To for a few years at the most. And he also didn't see any of the major effects because he left. The Republic was still intact. The First Order was basically a joke, at least as far as most people knew. And if Luke knew that Palpatine was back, it's even worse because he was in a position where he could have led to Palpatine's defeat much earlier and prepared the galaxy for his return. And he didn't. So that makes things even worse. But with Obi-Wan, The first thing is he didn't fully give up on everything. He does have a lot of doubts and is wondering if what he's doing is the right thing. He knows that he made some pretty major mistakes and isn't fully given up. He just wants to stay safe and protect Luke. But he doesn't want to go out and put himself in danger because of how horrible what happened to him in Revenge of the Sith was. And looking at Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith, he suffers probably one of the worst weeks ever for a fictional character. The only characters who could even compete and maybe even beat him in this is Vader slash Anakin for the same week of Revenge of the Sith. And I'd say Thor for the week of Ragnarok slash Infinity War slash the opening scene of Endgame, because those are pretty brutal weeks for both of the characters. And they're the only ones who couldn't have a worse week than Obi-Wan, at least off the top of my head. There's probably some other people, but at least off the top of my head, those are probably people who could even come close to competing with Obi-Wan for having one of the worst weeks ever. Yeah, just looking at everything Obi-Wan just suffered in that week alone, and I'm not sure exactly how much time passes in Revenge of the Sith, but I could say with good certainty that less than a week passes between the events of Order 66 being executed to the moment Obi-Wan leaves Anakin burning on Mustafar. And but I mean, I'm not exactly sure how much time passes in Revenge of the Sith. A few months may pass between, the opening scenes and the one where Obi-Wan goes out on his mission. We don't know exactly how much time passes, but still, I think that, well, that's first off a topic for another video, trying to figure that out. But also, yeah, I think that this is a pretty interesting storyline to look at. I think that Obi-Wan, it does make sense for him to be so depressed because he's basically the cause of, well, so many bad things. He trained the guy who went and wiped out most of the Jedi Order. He had to leave the man he saw as a brother and who he basically raised since around the time he turned 10. Since although Anakin is 9 in The Phantom Menace, he is 20 in The Attack of the Clones, and that takes place 10 years after, and that's because Anakin turns 10 basically right after the events of The Phantom Menace. And he may even be 10 in the, well, closing scene. But yeah, just going over this, he raised Anakin from about when he was 10, and with that, he has spent over a decade training him, and then 3 years fighting in the front lines with him. And it was pretty devastating to see him burn alive, and first off, thinking that he is dead, and it gets even worse when he learns that he's alive. But with this, you could just see how that would affect him so much because Luke didn't really kill anyone that he loved. He may have just pushed Ben towards the dark side just a little more, but he didn't go and kill anyone he truly fell in love with, as far as we know. And if that did happen, well, they didn't tell us, and they could have told us that in a movie or even a book, but since The Last Jedi came out in 2017, I think? It's 2017 or 2018, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure it's 2017. But it's been about 4 to 5 years, depending on the year it released, and going rounding up and down with months since this movie came out, and I think half a decade is good enough time to explain why he was so devastated by this. I'll just simply say he could have lost a loved one in that, but since they didn't, we cannot just go assume that because they never told us that, so I'm not gonna go and pretend like that's what happened. You could, but since they didn't tell us, I'm not going to be assuming that happened. And Luke really just pushed Ben towards the dark side. But Obi-Wan, he went and caused the entire genocide of his order. And let's just take a look at the size of Luke's order. He had a pretty small temple, and everyone was there. He had at the most maybe a dozen to 2 dozen students, while there were thousands of Jedi. I believe in Attack of the Clones there was about 10,000 Jedi. And just assuming from Battle of Geonosis and the Clone Wars, there was probably around 5 to 7,000 Jedi who were all mainly killed in Order 66. Since I'd say that at the most, there was probably around 100 to 200 survivors of Order 66. And at this point in the timeline, there's probably about 2 dozen at the most. So yeah, I think that just all the devastation that happened there is a lot more intense than what happened with Luke, and Obi-Wan has so much more to be regretful over, since he also had his apprentice be responsible for the rise of the Empire, while Luke had nothing to do with the rise of the First Order directly. I mean, he did technically overthrow the Empire, which becomes the First Order, but he didn't cause the First Order to be created, and Ben basically does nothing with that either. It is Palpatine through Snoke, and yeah, even if you don't count it at the time, if you just count episode 7 and 8, it just still doesn't have good enough motivation for Luke to sort of turn into a different person and be defeated, because you're just not given enough while you see how much Obi-Wan has suffered in Revenge of the Sith, and how much he hated that he had to go and kill off Anakin. At least that's what he thinks he did. And that is so devastating to him. And it becomes even worse when he learns that Anakin is alive and has been turned into a monster. And if you just look at who Kylo Ren is, Kylo Ren wasn't that horrible of a person, especially compared to Vader. Kylo was always resisting the pull to the light, while Vader basically killed off the personality of Anakin until he saw Luke. And sometime between the moment Luke jumped off the ledge in Empire Strikes Back and the moment where Palpatine began to use Force Lightning on Luke, a small little flame was ignited in Vader where Anakin was able to take back control. And I think maybe that small little part was in the moment where Luke jumped off the ledge and was willing to die rather than face the dark side. And I think that's what helped reignite Anakin Skywalker. And he slowly grew until he was able to take over from Vader and sacrifice himself. I think this was really interesting. But yeah, I just think that it was done so much better here, and it makes sense because of how tragic the events Obi-Wan had to suffer through were, while you can't really say the same for Luke since you didn't really see that much, and it wasn't explained until after we see everything. But since it was all explained before with Obi-Wan, it makes a lot more sense, and we haven't even got the full context with Luke yet. And it's been, as I said, nearly half a decade. So it is pretty bad storytelling, and I don't think it was explained well, as I said, for Luke, but it's perfectly explained for Obi-Wan, and definitely makes sense for why he would be so devastated by what happened in these movies, and definitely makes sense. But I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.